Hey, my name is Ross Campbell, welcome to my channel. Today is not exactly what I would call a lesson as such, but more an analysis of and tribute to the brilliant guitar work of one of my favourite classic rock bands ever, Thin Lizzy. So I was recently in Dublin and I just had to go and pay a visit to the Phil Lynott statue in Dublin because I've been a huge Thin Lizzy fan ever since I was a young teenager. I've played more than my fair share of Thin Lizzy covers in bands over the years, and it was really cool to get to see his statue, to get to see him standing there with his P bass. Unfortunately, I didn't have a pic to leave behind to pay respect to the man himself, but maybe I'll remember next time I go to Dublin. Anyway, that's where the inspiration to make this video came from. We're going to specifically take a look at the harmonies shared between the guitar players in Thin Lizzy, of which there have been many, you know, Scott Gorham, Brian Robertson, Gary Moore, to name a few. Because let's face it, along with Phil Lynott's iconic bass lines and his lyrics, the dueling guitar harmonies are probably the thing that, you know, grabbed the listener's ear the most when it comes to listening to Thin Lizzy. It's not Thin Lizzy if there's not dueling guitar harmonies in pretty much every song. In the song The Boys Are Back in Town, the outro section is based on this repeating motif which we've all heard before. And in the album recording of this track, there's at least 5 guitar tracks going on at the same time. They all kind of build up gradually, but towards the end of the track there's at least 5 guitar tracks, all playing the same motif but starting it on different degrees of the scale. The scale being A major, by the way. In fact, A flat major, because they tuned down a half step. But anyway, they're all playing the same motif, repeating it on different degrees of the scale. So they're harmonizing with each other to create this huge epic outro. I've listened really close to the album recording and I think I've worked out exactly what's going on in that outro with regards to the harmonies. And I'm going to play that for you now. I'm going to show you my interpretation of the outro to the album recording of The Boys Are Back in Town. And then after that, after you've heard it, I want to talk a bit about how they went about playing this live with just 2 guitar players. Now, there might have been some additional overdubs where they maybe doubled up on some of those guitar lines that you just saw me play, but as far as I can tell, those are the 5 main guitar tracks in the outro to The Boys Are Back in Town. Now, obviously when they played live, they only had 2 guitar players. So how did they go about recreating that outro in a live setting? Well, the answer is that they didn't. They didn't bring in an additional 3 guitar players, nor did they use tracks, which probably weren't even a thing back then. But when you listen to the live versions of the song, you'll notice that you do hear each of those 5 guitar parts at some point in the outro. So what the guitar players would do is they would start with those 2 harmonies that you hear at the beginning of the outro, which, just as a reminder, went like this. And then they would ascend the A flat major scale and essentially just repeat that same motif, but starting on different degrees of the scale. And in the process of doing so, those 2 guitar players are able to eventually cover all 5 of those guitar tracks that you hear in the original album recording. And the harmonies are, for the most part, in thirds. There's maybe a couple of parts here and there where the distance between the notes is a fourth rather than a third, but for the most part they're harmonizing in thirds. So essentially the guitar players are doing the best that they can to recreate that huge epic outro, and they are covering all of the harmonies that you hear in the album track, but just at a different time. And to be honest with you, in my personal opinion, if they'd just done that in the studio, if they just laid down 2 guitar tracks for that outro, the song would still be just as iconic. But I guess we're maybe having one of those experimental days in the studio where you're thinking, how can we make this already awesome song sound even better production-wise? So I get that. I do understand why they would do that, because for me it was a lot of fun laying down 5 guitar harmonies. It does sound epic. At the same time though, the live versions sound just as epic to me, because there's so much energy that you can hear and feel in those live performances. So here's what they do live. Again, I've recorded my own interpretation of this and I've tried to get it as close as possible. And they do this awesome ending live, which you don't hear on the album recording because it's one of those fade out tracks, unfortunately. But what you should be paying attention to here is what happens when the harmonies ascend. You'll notice that the low guitar part, when it moves up, it's essentially taking over from the harmony that the high guitar part was previously playing. So it's like you've got the low guitar and the high guitar playing the same harmony. They maybe repeat it 2 or 4 times, and then the high harmony moves up, the low harmony moves up at the same time, and now it's essentially playing what this guitar part was previously playing, if that makes sense. And the same thing happens every time they ascend with the harmonies. So here's what the live version sounds like. So that is how the harmonies work in The Boys Are Back in Town. Every time they move up the scale, the low guitar part is essentially taking over from what the high guitar part was previously playing. There is another Lizzy track that I thought would be cool to talk about with regards to the harmonies, because it does pretty much exactly the same thing as what you just saw and heard in the Boys Are Back in Town live version. This song is called Waiting for an Alibi off of the Black Rose album. In the outro to this song, there's another harmonized motif that you'll hear move up the scale multiple times. And again, just like they do in the live version of The Boys Are Back in Town, the low guitar part takes over from what the high guitar part was previously playing every time that they move up the scale. So here's my recording of the outro to Waiting for an Alibi. Pretty awesome stuff. Can't go wrong with some good old Thin Lizzy. I will always love that band. And the way that they played their harmonies always stood out to me, because there's plenty of bands out there that do the dueling guitar harmony thing, but in my opinion, Thin Lizzy did it best, because the way that they take their harmonies and develop them and move up the scale like I was showing you in this video, that to me is just a great way of developing a good outro section. It's much better and more enjoyable to listen to than if they were to just sit on the same harmony for 1 to 2 minutes. And if you wanted to create harmonies like that yourself, as I mentioned earlier, they're mostly harmonizing in thirds. So let's do an example. Say you're in C major using the C major scale, and you have this repeating motif that starts on the root note C. If you were to harmonize that by a third, which is what Thin Lizzy typically would do, then you would take that rhythmic motif and apply it to the C major scale, but starting on the note E, because E is a third higher than C in the C major scale. So C, D, E, 1, 2, 3. It's a third higher. As always, if you guys are unfamiliar with things like thirds and fourths and the major scale and how it actually works and how to see it and improvise with it on the guitar, I teach all of those concepts in my first online guitar course, Bulletproof Guitar Player Part 1, Master the Fretboard. Links are in the description if you're interested. And it's worth noting, if you were to write some harmonies of your own Thin Lizzy style in thirds like I was just talking about, as you move up the scale, as you take those harmonies and move them up the scale, you'll probably notice that certain thirds might not clash with each other, but not sound ideal, not sound like the best possible fit. So you might have to adjust certain notes here and there and maybe play a fourth instead of a third sometimes, because that's what Thin Lizzy would often do with their harmonies. It's not exactly strict thirds with every single note that they're playing. Sometimes they'll shift it up to a fourth because it just sounds stronger. Anyway, that does it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed this little tribute to one of my favorite bands ever. I had a lot of fun recording those guitar and bass parts. And if you did enjoy the video, then please do me a favor and hit the like button down below, share it with your friends, anyone that might be interested in seeing this. Don't forget to click the subscribe button for more content like this in the future, and I will see you guys in the next one.